So how can it be that people like Aubrey de Grey tend to ignore these practical circumstances of life as it is lived in everyday circumstances so easily when they have this big projection on the future and believe in technology?
I suppose the people who imagine that these death-defying technologies can be used only or mainly for the purposes they themselves want them to be used for, they're assuming a background of relative peace and relative social and political stability of the kind that has existed in the West, or most Western countries, for the last 20 or 30 years. In other words, they're leaving out of account what it meant to be a scientist or a technologist in the Second World War. Mm-hmm. They're leaving out of account the enormous convulsions and conflicts in which technologies which were invented for one purpose were immediately turned to purposes of war and purposes of human conflict. So they're just, in a way, not thinking about that or forgetting about it. It's a kind of historical amnesia. But if you think, or maybe they suppose that such circumstances won't happen again. Mm-hmm. Maybe they suppose that we've now moved, as some people argue or believe, to a kind of long peace, a period in which all these world historical conflicts will not happen again. We won't have science and technology being recruited to purposes of war. But that's in a way a fantasy, because it already is the case that, for example, the internet and cyber technologies are used for purposes of cyber war by China, by Russia, and by Western powers. That's already the case. So I think they're kind of screening that out from their thinking and assuming that they can carry on with their work, they can develop these technologies, and they can reap their benefits without, as it were, being severely impacted by these changes. If we imagine these new technologies developing rapidly over the next 10, 20, 30 years, even without big wars, even without huge revolutions, even without colossal economic upheavals, then we can easily envision a situation in which the affluent, the 1% or the 2%, and certainly the 0.1%, would be in a position to have healthy lives of 150 years, shall we say, and indefinitely extendable, with the rest of society living maybe till 80 or 90, and many still dying at 50 or 60. And that's even in Britain, even in Europe, even in America. Now, is that a desirable state of affairs? Well, is it really practically sustainable? What would be the economic, the political consequences? How would people vote? How would they conflict? Would the majority, which was denied because it just couldn't afford it, the majority that couldn't afford these life extensions, would they just accept that? Or would they try to curtail it? Would there be conflict? These are surely not just possibilities, they're inevitable conflicts that will arise.
Now, technology and progress are often used as synonyms.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Technological progress is real in the sense that there is advance in technology, as in human knowledge and science, is cumulative and accretive, meaning that what has been gained in the past isn't regularly lost, but carried on to the next stage. And it's even to some extent exponential. It increases, and even at an increasing rate. That's what's happened in technology, and that's what's also happened in the growth of knowledge. So the growth of knowledge is progressive in the sense that it's cumulative, accretive, and potentially exponential. Now, advance in ethics and politics, or if you like, in civilization, isn't like that. Advances in ethics and politics are real. There are advances in today's world that didn't exist before, and also, I would say,
like abolishing slavery.
Like abolishing slavery, or but of course there are enormously long periods of regression. Civilization generally, civilizations have a habit of regularly collapsing into barbarism, or even if they don't collapse, they have a regular habit of becoming barbarous in certain respects. So in ethics and politics, entropy is more of a kind of phenomenon than it is in the growth of knowledge and technology. In other words, a slide back. Civilizations are inherently fragile. People who understand what it means to behave fairly and decently, understand what it means not to take bribes, not to be cruel, not to attack the weak. People who understand what it means to live well are wiped out, killed off, perish in some way. Then you can have a long, long, long period of barbarism. The institutions which enable these immortalist projects, these death-defying technologies, such as cryonics, to be developed, are themselves mortal. The surrounding institutions are mortal, and they're caught up in all the conflicts of the world. Well, supposing someone had themselves frozen, if it were technologically feasible at that point, in the 1920s for 50 years, what would have happened in America, say, in the subsequent 50 years? Well, there would have been a great stock market crash. There would have been the Great Depression. Countless thousands and tens of thousands of businesses would have gone out of business. There would have been the Second World War. There would have been a major Cold War. There would have been political transformations of various kinds. And this is in America, the world's most stable, one of the most stable 20th century states. And yet I would think it would be quite improbable that the firm, the company, the corporation, which had put away your brain in 1925, would still be there in 1975, that it would be highly improbable that there hadn't been power cuts, there hadn't been bankruptcy, there hadn't been changes or contestation of the law, there hadn't been corruption, corporate corruption of some kind. It's extremely unlikely that even over a 50-year period in the world's most stable modern state, that you still be there undamaged.
Yeah, it's obvious that people who strive for immortality think it's a good thing, and they have lots of arguments for it. And saying, only stupid people will be bored and so on. But is there any good argument for dying? Is mortality sweet?
Death can't be seen purely as a bad thing. I can easily imagine, not only for myself but for others, living long enough to have done what I wanted to do, to have seen what I wanted to see, to have enjoyed what I wanted to have enjoyed. And I don't see that in any negative way. I see it as completion, a type of completion. Whereas those who want to live everlastingly, really, I think, are people who reject any notion of sufficiency or enough. For them, there can never be enough. Their desires are insatiable. They would say their imagination is illimitable, is infinite. So they want to go on and on and on. If you've done what you want, you've had the human experiences you want, you've had the human relationships you want to have had, you've achieved what you want, you may simply want to depart. And if you doubt this, by the way, there are some wonderful letters by Seneca, the Roman dramatist and essayist and letter writer, to a young pupil of his, in which, and this I think shows how far we've moved away from the ancient world, not always to our benefit. He says, well, if you've tasted the best wines, if you've enjoyed the best food, if you've seen the most beautiful architecture and heard the most beautiful music that human beings are capable of, what more holds you to the world? Now, he says that in the context of, he said, don't be afraid of illness. Don't be afraid of being killed in a military coup, which happened quite frequently. Don't be afraid of being killed in a war. You've already enjoyed the fruits of human life. And so I think that's a possible attitude which I think we can learn from. And the obsessive fear of death, which expresses itself in not wanting to live longer and more healthily. If there were an aspirin-like pill which would give me, I'm old enough now, I'm in my late 60s, to know what aging means. If there was a pill which would enable me to enjoy 30 more years of healthy life, I would probably take it. Now, the Anti-Death League, would say, well, why not another pill after that for another 30 and 300 and 3,000?
Yeah.
For them, you see, they think, as it were, with a kind of primitive childlike logic. If you want 30 more years, why don't you want 300 more years or 3,000 or 3 million? And if you don't, it's a kind of weakness. It means you can't think of new things to do on your 3 millionth birthday. It shows to me a kind of low level of human vitality to want to go on forever. It's not the length of life, it's the depth and the height of life that make it worth living.